Welcome, students. We're back for another class of Welcome to Hollywood, the class that teaches you, the student, how the overarching industry works as a whole. And of course, this semester, we are focused on this critical question that Martin Scorsese dusted up in November. The question that he provocatively asked, are superhero movies cinema, capital C cinema, right? And who better to explore that question and to explore the question of just what is cinema? If we're gonna call something capital C cinema, what are its attributes? Who better to explore that than the cinematographer, director of photography of arguably the most courageous superhero movie of all time. I think it's pretty easy to make that case in terms of how brave Joker was. When you think about putting massive amounts of money against a film that wouldn't necessarily read as the most commercial interpretation of the comic book that you might find. So before we even start, I'm glad that Redelia, you've had a chance to meet Larry and chit chat a little bit. But I thought maybe we would bring up everybody's camera, everybody turn on their cameras so that Larry can see what he's looking at here. Now, Larry, are you in the mode where you're seeing the whole Brady Bunch patchwork and seeing everybody?
Gallery view.
No, but I can. Yeah, I got, and then what? I can scroll all the way through. I can go one of two. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
That's right.
How you doing? That's a lot of friendly faces.
Yes.
And then in addition, we're also streaming this live on YouTube. So we've got 10 people watching the live stream. We've got our students here in the class. And there's really nobody better, I think, to explore this than Larry. Larry was the very first guest that FilmSpark ever had. We had a chance to do a little bit of very initial pre-prep on a project that never was, and we became fast friends. And Larry had put together this incredible lookbook, which for those of you who don't know, students, a lookbook is essentially a compilation of photographs and sometimes videos, but usually photographs, paintings, pictures that a cinematographer will put together to begin a conversation about the look of the film. And it was so astounding in its artistry and also its comprehensiveness that I just knew this was somebody I wanted to spend more time with. And so we became friends. Larry had already shot Garden State, and I asked him, hey, would you be okay if we screened Garden State and then have video conferenced you in so that we could have the students ask you questions about the movie? And he was like, sure, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And that's actually really what launched FilmSpark. It was our very first event. And now here we are a good, 8 years later and forced to use the video conferencing tool and very well prepared to do it because we got started so many years ago. So everybody turn on your cameras again, turn on your microphones and give Larry a big Sun Devil Santa Monica College welcome. Give him some love, people. Come on.
Welcome.
Hey, hi.
Solo was a masterpiece.
Yeah, man.
How are you guys?
How are
Awesome.
you?
So happy to be here. So happy. I'm excited for this conversation. It's a big question. Been thinking about it a lot. Yeah, I really like this question of what is capital C cinema, whatever that means. But I mean, I know what it means, which is like, what is it, a movie or is it a film, perhaps, that sort of age-old question.
Mm.
I'm interested, I came from a background in what wasn't, I didn't go to film school and I didn't sort of study film in that sort of largely theoretical sense. I did take some classes in college. I was an economics major, but I came at movies and I came at film, and partly through my interest in photography, but I think I came at it from a very pure sense, and I think this speaks to some extent to the question at hand and the real answer at large, which is I was a film fan. So for me, watching movies with a new set of eyes to see it as a piece of art or to see it as a piece of craftsmanship or technical expertise was really interesting, because I was just your average person who would go to the movies, and you'd either like it, you wouldn't. It's like every single person in the history of time. Movies are very egalitarian in that regard. And the short answer, I would say, to Adam's question, which obviously has a lot larger pieces to its answer, is in relation maybe to the question that Scorsese asked, is yes, all movies are equal in so much as it's like a movie is a movie. And the unique way in which movies basically came to be are there these communal, large collaborative efforts. They're not paintings, they're not novels, they're not music, although they combine a lot of those same techniques, but they're collaborative. And they're sort of, they're a beautiful combination of two things, which is your capital C cinema would effectively, in large part, refer to some sort of auteur angle, which is the director as the singular vision of the movie. And I think in large part that speaks to the sort of capital C cinema. But movies are freaking expensive, and they get more and more expensive. So they're not something, yes, they're something you could make by yourself at home, but in large part, they're intended to be consumed by large masses of people. I would venture to say the more the merrier. And they involve, for the most part, a decent sum of money and other people's money. They're usually not the person making the film. It's not their money. And so I would say a Marvel movie is just as valid as Taxi Driver. They're just different in like what perhaps they're trying to sort of execute. But I would say they're similar in what they're trying to execute, in that they're both trying to move people and trying to sort of get people to engage with them as a piece of art and entertainment, both those things, right? And I had the fortunate experience to sort of be a part of a movie that does not exist. No movie exists in a vacuum, but Joker, more than anything, doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of a huge piece of intellectual property for Warner Brothers. It's part of a legacy of films for the Batman franchise. And so, no, as much as we made a film that we feel was very singular and unique, it's not made by one person. It's made with all kinds of constraints on it. And as far as an opening statement, if I was sitting in front of and I say this with the greatest respect to Scorsese, because I'm a huge fan and love his films and admire them, and have from the time long before I decided I wanted to be a filmmaker, is I would say singular vision, unconstrained by budget or other people's opinions, does not necessarily make the greatest capital C cinema. I love Raging Bull. It's my favorite Scorsese movie. I think it's a masterpiece. But if you read a great novel about making movies called Final Cut, which is about the early days of like United Artists and the downfall of United Artists, there's a great story in there about the making of Raging Bull. And effectively, two executives have to go to Scorsese and De Niro and tell them they're not making the movie because there's nobody who's going to be interested in telling the story of Jake LaMotta, because effectively he's a scumbag. And then there's just who's going to be interested in listening to this person's story. And it forced De Niro and Scorsese to come back 2 weeks later with a new draft, in which that was the draft that was the movie that they made. And I would venture to say, had they not been forced to either make some adjustments to that original draft or to reconsider some of what that executive, as stupid as they would probably dismiss that executive's notes were, the movie would be less good than what it was and less of a masterpiece. So every movie has other people's opinions involved. And I think this idea that a Marvel movie, because probably not since the studio system of the 40s and the 30s and the 50s, in which the director was not the auteur of the movie, Louis B. Mayer was, or the studio was, or sometimes the distribution company. In the way that I think what Scorsese perhaps was trying to make a point was that these big Marvel movies or these big event movies have become amusement rides, right? And how damning is that to cinema at large? But I would venture to say, and I can show you some examples tonight as we talk about this, that when faced with the question early in my career of like, what kind of movies do I like? Somebody asked me very early on when I first moved to LA and I was trying to get a job, list your 20 favorite movies. And of course, when faced with that, you sort of go to the place of thinking, I have to be intellectual and esoteric about these choices. And I have to say movies that are really artistic and blah, blah, blah. Instead, I just freeform wrote these movies out. And at least 50% of the 20 movies I listed were all huge blockbuster movies. They were all movies made for the masses, enjoyed by the masses, and would perhaps, under Scorsese's definition, not be considered capital C cinema. And over time, I feel like they have been now part of this capital C cinema. But some of those movies were derided for the same reasons, perhaps he was saying, that like whether it's Marvel or whether just event movies, made for huge masses of people, have been derided. Perhaps that's what he was speaking to. So
And so two questions to that. So first, based on just your memory of what Scorsese wrote or said in the interviews, what was your understanding of his definition of cinema, and what were those movies that you feel now may be regarded as cinema, even though they might not have been, they might not have fit his definition back in the day when they came out?
So without seeing the quote again, and again, I'm not saying this because like I really admire Scorsese immensely. So it was an interesting statement, and I wish I should probably have more specific of the context. But whether it was Scorsese said it or somebody else said it, it's a common thing. It's not Scorsese alone who's questioning. Have we sort of moved in a direction that now movies have become dumber and less sophisticated and less? So to me, I think it's like, first of all, there are very few true auteurs, right? And by auteur, of course, we mean like singular vision of one person making a film with near total control, right? So that they're able to make choices unencumbered by the traditional sort of forces that weigh down on all movies. And yet when you see perhaps, let's say Marvel as an example, right, is that they are being made, and by the way, that's probably no different than the Star Wars franchise under Disney versus the Star Wars franchise under George Lucas, which is like they are being controlled, let's say in Star Wars by Kathleen Kennedy, in Marvel by by Kevin Feige, right? So those two entities are the ultimate authors of those movies. And whether it's like below there is the visual effects supervisor in the case of Marvel, and they may have more authority to make decisions on the movie than the director does. Perhaps that's what Scorsese was talking about, which as a director, sure, that's a bummer to say the least. But I would say even a director like Todd Phillips, who I've worked with 6 times, I've yet to see anyone weigh down on Todd. There are never executives on set. There are never people giving tons of notes, blah, 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 all that stuff. So I would say Todd has as much authority and as much sort of freedom to make his movies as any director I've ever seen or worked with personally. Still, there are certain things that changed Joker that were out of his hands. And I'd venture to say they changed Joker for the better. And that's my point ultimately, is that, again, it's no movies exist in a vacuum. And so I think one of the beautiful things, frankly, about movies is that some of those constraints, some of the, whether it's budget, time, development execs, the distributor, it can't be R-rated because we need it to make money. All of these things that lead into the decisions to make decisions throughout the making of a movie, they're part of what that movie is. And I would say making a movie, like when you set out, when you're the Russo brothers, you have a budget that's over $500 million to make 2 Avengers movies. And I would say it's probably more like 600 million. You are carrying the weight of this enormous business on your shoulders, in which each one of those movies nearly has to make $2 billion just to make a profit. I would say the weight of those 2 directors to make that is greater than the weight of anybody ever making a movie in the history of time. You know, perhaps maybe Avatars 2 and 3 will have that same type of pressure. I think that's an immense achievement to pull that off. And not just pull it off, but to actually then have it make enough money to be a huge success. I have as much respect for that as I do for Parasite. And so to some extent, I'm defending those movies because I recognize it's like I saw this whole movie about, it was like a documentary I watched one night about these special boat captains that literally, when you take a huge tanker or some huge ship with all this cargo and it gets to the sort of port of entry into like Italy or even maybe not Long Beach, but there are certain ports in the world in which they literally, the captain who's taken that ship all across the Pacific steps out of the way and some new guy or woman comes in and now has to steer this ship into the docks because it is so difficult. And any mistake to move this massive ship would cause catastrophic destruction. I was like, this is an immense thing. And I remember I saw that documentary and we were making Hangover 2 at the time. And I was thinking what immense pressure it is to follow up the Hangover and still deliver something. And of course it got dinged by people, criticizing all that stuff. But to be a director on helming one of those type of movies is so much hard. It's so hard. You have to be like one of those ship captains bringing this into some port. And if you steer wrong, you've lost somebody hundreds of millions of dollars. The movies that I would say, and they all ended up on my favorite movies of all time list, and I would say they're capital C movies, is Jaws, which many people would say Jaws changed movie making towards this new version that Scorsese was talking about. You know, like there are a lot of people that point to Jaws and Star Wars as fundamentally changing movies for the worse in the way that they made opening weekend box office so important. Movies stayed in the theater like shorter. Everybody now had to try to make $100 million gross on a movie. Like the bar changed, right? And suddenly it was the birth of the blockbuster. And so many people derided those movies simply because of the new standard they set for what a movie had to be. And no longer was it Midnight Cowboy and some small character piece driven stuff from the 70s, which are awesome. Don't get me wrong. Love them. Taxi Driver, you name it. But suddenly now Raging Bull is competing against, I'm trying to think of what was out in 1980, or Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was probably 81, or the remake, or Empire Strike Back, which is a similar time, So it's like, yes, Scorsese for his career was now suddenly competing against these movies that frankly he probably wasn't making, right? But The Departed is immensely popular. Wolf of Wall Street, immensely popular. Shutter Island, immensely popular. He won an Oscar for a movie that was immensely popular, and some would argue more accessible and pulpy, and maybe made. Departed is a remake of Infernal Affairs, right? So it's like it's not no longer this auteur Scorsese Italian American story. He's telling the story of a remake of a foreign film. So you know, that's sort of an interesting thing. But I, as somebody who, you know, there was like a great Saturday Night Live skit where it's like a caveman lawyer, and he's like, I'm just a caveman, but this is what I think. And it was a way to basically go, I'm a stupid person, so like I don't have all these highfalutin ideas, but this is what I think. And I always feel the same way about movies, which is like, it doesn't matter how artistic a movie is. Does it move you? Does it engage you? Does it hold your attention? And do you want to maybe watch it again? And like that's all that matters. Any one of those things come into play, it's probably a capital C movie for me, you know? And I think Rocky is as valid a movie, capital C movie and film, as Raging Bull, you know?
So one of the things that I asked Larry to do, you just gave it, that was beautifully said, all of it. And but it did culminate with just a list, a bullet point that's got to move me. What were the other things?
Yeah, so I mean, I made a list of things that I feel like, I mean, the lead out of my first thing of like capital C, right? And the reason I let out with that long soliloquy about it is that the first thing in my list, which is singular vision, is actually the thing most at conflict with this capital C idea. And all I would say is this is, and I would speak to this about any movie, and this is just my own personal preference, which is I'm not generally a comic book or a superhero movie. And what I've noticed is even within, let's say, just says they're the most successful in the history of time, is in the Marvel franchise. What I've discovered about myself is when the filmmakers are able to inject a little bit of singularity, even if it's not all the way through, right? If it's like the opening scene in Black Panther, which felt not too dissimilar in the way that it just set the stage for this like young kid in like 1970s or whatever. It felt like Oakland. It felt like Ryan Coogler. It felt like his personal type of movies that he would make in a big package. Eventually, yes, it becomes green screen, blah, 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 stuff that is like, we can argue whether we want about how amazing they are. Some people love it, right? They love it. It's not my thing. But if it's that, or if it's like, you know, the first of the two-part Avengers Infinity War or whatever, there's two of them, I can't remember which one, where it's basically an hour and a half with not a single fight. It's just emotional setup of all these characters leading to the second, you know, or, you know, in a 3-hour movie. I would say that's immensely singular. Is like the Russo brothers delivered a 3.5-hour movie in which the last one actually, the hour and a half that started it had almost no fighting. I would go, that's pretty singular. Taika's work on Thor Ragnarok, right? It's like, that is very Taika. So that's pretty singular. James Gunn in the Guardians thing. It's when I see those moments, I connect. So for me, I would say they're not universal across the entire movie. They're not going to be as singular a vision as Magnolia or Raging Bull or Taxi Driver, but they are still singular at times. And I would say the singularity is the essence of a capital C movie, which is that auteur idea. So that's why I let out with that. That would be the number one thing. But I think that's also the same reason that we have this discussion is like, oh, well, you know, you can't make movies by committee. And it's like, I'm sorry, guys, when it's $250 million, there's usually a committee involved. It's like there are not a lot of corporations that are worth $250 million with just one person in a room making something.
You know how Ted Hope, and I want to get through the list so that we can get to the examples. And I got this amazing thing to share with all the students. Well, really Larry does, which is his system called Shot Deck. But on the singularity point, the way that Ted Hope always described it, which I thought was brilliant, he's very collaborative, but he once said, this is a guy that runs Amazon Studios right now for the film side, and a great producer in his own right, everybody, you know, he's won 3 grand jury prizes at Sundance. And he said, I want to produce movies that only one director could tell, right? So that, you know, there might be other influences and stuff, but ultimately when the film comes out, you know that there was really only one person that could have told that story that way. So so
I
singularity.
think that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah, because that one invites and opens the process to other collaborations, but somebody's still steering that ship.
Sure. But I would say there are some movies that have stood the test of time, right? I just rewatched Wizard of Oz with my daughter, and that movie was derided. It's still derided by some people. I think that movie is 100% capital C. It's first of all, the opening black and white footage is stunning. It's amazing, you know. So as a piece of artistry, there's a lot more in that movie that I'm impressed with than ever before, particularly knowing it was made in 1939. But I don't think Victor Fleming was an auteur. I think the producer of that movie is the author of that movie, and obviously it's based on a book, so you're not saying the screenwriter is the author. It's like there are so many authors of that movie, and so that's an example of like, was Victor Fleming the only person could have made that movie? No, but he made the movie, and so he's got a huge say in what that movie finally was, you know. But again, I think there are certain authors, let's say, of these sort of like massive 250 plus you know, movies that have to deliver $1 billion at the box office, that they still have enough singularity that those are the ones that often will at least have some resonance with me. Otherwise my brain shuts off. I don't even watch them, you know.
Well,
And
yeah,
so they don't have much, but that doesn't mean they don't have an effect on other people. That's just me.
Now, the other thing, you know, Wizard of Oz, there were actually 2 credited directors and 4 directors that worked on the project. So it doesn't necessarily mean that singularity is coming from
Right.
the director, is what you're saying. So singularity of vision, number one, or some aspect that like it's coming through a very particular point of view. And then, so what's number 2 you had on your list?
Yeah, and I can show a little clip from that, which is, for me, it has to have something human. I don't care if the movie is about you know, space aliens or whatever, right? And it's, again, it speaks to maybe this question at large about superhero movies, is they are by definition superhuman, right? But they better be human enough for me to care, right? And so this isn't an example of a movie from that's a superhero movie. This is an example of one that's that I just appreciate. Oh wait, hold on. Let me just do this. This is from Raging Bull. We'll watch it and then we'll sort of talk about it.
I got these small hands. I got like little girls' hands. I got them too. What's the difference? You know what that means? No matter how big I get, no matter who I fight, no matter what I do, I ain't never gonna fight Joe Louis.
Yeah, that's right. He's a heavyweight, you're a middleweight. We know that.
I ain't never gonna get a chance to fight the best there is. And you know something? I'm better than him. I ain't never gonna get a chance. You're asking me what's wrong.
But you're crazy to even think about something like that. I mean, he's a fucking heavyweight, you're a middleweight. It's impossible. It'll never happen, so why go crazy thinking about it? It's not normal.
Do me a favor.
You know
I want you to hit me in the face.
what?
I want you to hit me in the face.
Forget about it.
Joey, I want you to hit me in the face. Go ahead. Go ahead, take your
I
best.
said forget about it. I ain't doing it.
Come on, we have fights all the time. What are you worried now you're gonna hit me in the face? Hit me in the face. Go ahead.
No.
What are you afraid?
Afraid of what?
Come on, don't be a little faggot. Come on, hit me.
I ain't a fag.
Take your best shot, Jack.
Come on, Jack, huh? You gotta be a real jerk and want me to punch you in the face.
Hey, Joey, did I not tell you just to do it? Now I'm telling you, gotta do it.
I ain't hitting you.
Hey, you're a little brother, Joey. I'm telling you something.
I know what you said. I ain't doing it. I don't care if you get mad. I ain't doing it. Fucking nut. Not doing it. Not doing it. I don't have any gloves anyway. What am I gonna hit you with? Table? I ain't doing
Use that over there.
it. What?
That's right, use that. Wrap it around your hand. How many times I gotta tell you?
Not too many
Go
more.
ahead. All right, go ahead.
You want me to hit you?
I want you to hit me with everything you got. I want you to fucking lay me out. Go ahead.
You sure?
Yeah.
All right.
Harder. Yeah? You throw a punch like you take it up the ass. Come on. Harder. Harder. Harder.
That's hard, you fuck. What do you
Take it
want?
off. Take it off.
Aw, come on. You wanna stop now?
Take it
That's
off.
enough.
Okay.
That's
Come on. Come
fuck
on.
around.
Girl, come on.
Good girl, huh?
I'm gonna smack you again. Throw it again.
That's enough. That's enough.
Harder, harder.
Nah, your fucking cuts are opening and everything. What are you trying to prove? What does it prove?
You know, for me, my lead out there was my something human, something emotionally truthful. There's also another one I have in there, which is something very specific. And just so, this scene is like in a movie that is about, and particularly in light of that book that I talked about, Final Cut, which talks just a short, it's basically about the making of Heaven's Gate, which was a historically huge failure, took down a studio. It took down United Artists, which basically was making it was making Raging Bull, but it was also making some Woody Allen movies at the time. These auteur movies, and they gave all this power to an auteur, Michael Cimino, and it took down the studio. But this little story they tell about Raging Bull is like, well, how do you humanize this guy that they said is a cockroach, you know? I think was their note they said about this guy. And to me, I better care. And it's like, I better care early, but at some point I better care deeply about the characters that I'm following in a movie. That's just like capital C, lowercase c, film, movie, you name it. If you don't care, you're not watching the movie. You're paying attention. You're thinking about something else. You're thinking about what you're going to eat afterwards. And in a movie like this, which is hard to watch at times, right? He is a ruthless character, and there's scenes in which he's banging his head in prison, going, "I'm not an animal. I'm not." So you recognize you're dealing very much with a flawed character. How do you care? And like Joker is a great example, right? It's like we made a movie in which, I mean, that was the conversation before the movie came out, is like, are you glorifying a monster? Are you glorifying an anti-hero? Are you glorifying somebody who does terrible things? But I would say the reason perhaps that the movie does connect and has been successful is that you do care about Arthur Fleck. But when I think about any movie, right, and to some extent, without sort of flopping all around, I'll give you all of them because a lot of them overlap, right? Let me just say some of the other ones so that it's not piecing them out, so you can think about them, because sometimes in these clips I've chosen, they overlap, right? So my thing was something emotionally true and human, make me lose myself and stop thinking of anything else. So at some point, it doesn't have to happen for all 2 hours of the movie. I think that's an impossible task. But at some point, you have to grab so much attention that they're not thinking about something else. You're not drifting into some other place. And the best example of that is just a scene, right? Would be this scene here.
Hey, Marty, I know you got a lot of problems downtown, but I've got a couple of problems at the house I wish you could take care of.
One, I've got some cats parking in front of the house. I can't get down to the office, and that garbage truck next to the office has got to be moved.
So what I need is a red zone. It's a simple thing you can take care of. You've done it
would you
before.
come here a minute,
Okay?
please?
Good.
Are you okay?
Everything's fine. Yeah, fine. It's fine.
Listen, if the kids go in the water is worrying you,
No.
they can play out here on the beach.
It's all right. Let them go.
It's cold. We know all about you, Chief. You don't go in the water at all, do you?
It's some bad hat, Harry.
Chief Brody, you are uptight. Yes. Come on. That's it.
Oh, do you know the Muffin Man? Muffin Man, who is
Stop it!
I mean, for me, that scene is effectively a masterclass in directing. Just the scene. You could take that scene, it's got a beginning, it's got a middle, it's got an end. It uses every filmmaking technique. You understand Brody is like, obviously there's so many things from the beginning. He's like such a relatable emotion. We're so emotionally connected to him. We care so deeply about the fact that he's like he's a beleaguered like chief that has a problem with a shark, and he doesn't want to close the beaches. I mean, it's as relatable as something going on right now with coronavirus, that scene. He's under immense stress. It challenges all the safety of all the people, including his own children. He's constantly being distracted from the first person, hiding, like blocking his view, to the second old man. There are like all those foreground people rushing past when he's trying to get people off the thing, to that final moment when everybody's safe and the one mother can't find her child. It's an amazing piece of filmmaking in a movie that was derided for being pulpy and changing filmmaking in the worst possible way. It's a masterclass. And Spielberg at 25 is making this movie under immense pressure where nothing's going right, and he's got a huge studio, so he's not an auteur at this point. He's just trying to form his filmmaking style.
You know what?
I care deeply about both these people, enough that I care, and I can't look away. In both those scenes, you can't look away as Jake LaMotta is asking his brother to punch him, you know?
It's interesting because what that reminded me of, oddly enough, was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Unshare your screen just for a second,
Yeah.
Mary. And then we can go back to sharing mode. But the reason it reminded me of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is because the central conceit of the scene in Jaws is very structurally similar to the central conceit of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That being, we know something horrific is on the horizon, right? And what's interesting about both of them is the artistry that goes into enabling the suspension of disbelief, right? Like, we've all seen Jaws a gazillion times. Why is it that film, even watching a clip that's lagging,
Right.
a YouTube clip that's lagging through Zoom, and I almost purposefully was trying to like not have it sort of enchant me and bring it into its world, but I got into its world.
Yeah.
And what do you think makes that ability? One could argue that a really important criteria for capital C cinema would be the ability to cast that spell over your audience. And you put it well. That's another way of saying that you're not thinking about anything else but that movie. And that I love that as a criteria, that in order to get into Larry's pantheon, the movie has to at least have enough moments where I'm just not thinking about anything but what is happening in that movie right there. I'm completely absorbed. But my question really quick is, what do you think it is that allows that in some films and where it doesn't work for others, where like another horror, a B movie horror film, you're just kind of like, oh yeah, they're gonna jump out and a jump scare and
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, that's the essence, right? Like it takes the same 300 people working their asses off to make a terrible movie as it is to make a masterpiece, right? Like nobody's working less hard. It's a series of 1,000 right decisions. I would say, and I didn't necessarily even follow that in my own movie that I directed, is you're making a sort of a pact with the audience in the first 5 minutes of a movie in which they are sitting waiting to feel to like understand, am I in good hands, right? It's like anything. It's like being confident. It's everything. It's like a first impression. And so when everyone sits down to a movie, the first 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes max, they're waiting for that first impression. And if you can get their attention and you can make sure that they know they're in good hands, they'll forgive a lot of mistakes after that, and they will give you the benefit of the doubt, and you're basically clear sailing for most of it. And so if you can start out well, and you can, and obviously the Jaws is a perfect example, because that opening scene when she goes night swimming is how the movie opens, and it will forever change the way I venture to say Jaws is the most influential movie of all time. And I say that because there's nobody who's seen Jaws can objectively say they go in the water and are deeper than they can see and not think of something below them, right? If you go swimming, and I know most people won't go swimming at night in the ocean. I won't. So I say that movie forever changed you fundamentally in the way you perceive your own world. And that's like, you talk about the power of movies. That is unbelievable as far as effectiveness, you know? And if you, I mean, I'd love it as a question, but I'd love for us to come up with like the top 10 of what that means as far as influence on you. Forever shapes the way you perceive something that's very normal, which is just swimming in the ocean.
I'm going to share an answer to that, a very kind of personal one. And Redelia, I'd love to know if you have one. And I won't go into it too much. I mean, I can literally spend a long time sort of waxing on this. I'm not the hugest, I have great respect for Quentin Tarantino, but his films were not the ones that, that I might take to a desert island if I could only take 10 or, but I have certainly come to appreciate him more and more, and in large part because of my students bringing in clips of things like Inglourious Bastards and Django, and then me taking the time to watch those films, and also just seeing the evolution of him as a filmmaker. I think it's been extraordinary, watching his evolution. I just wanted to share, you talked about the impact cinema can have on you. I never thought a Quentin Tarantino film would have the kind of impact on me that you're talking about. I just thought they were always like cool, inventive, interesting movies. And I'm not saying that this is what the reaction everybody should have had to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but this is just my experience. So, when you got kids walking in the door every 10 minutes and, 2 more and 4 dogs, you don't have time to watch movies the way that you used to. So I knew that I wasn't going to be able to see too many movies on, when the day they came out anymore. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to go see this movie the day it comes out. And I realized, oh man, I've got a appointment with my son is at school, and I'm only going to be able to watch 2/3 of the movie. But I wanted that excitement of being able to go watch it opening day. So I was like, I don't care. I'm just going to go watch 2/3, and I'm going to get up out of that theater. I don't care how good it is. I'm going to walk out and go, to my kids, school appointment. So I do it, and it gets all the way up to, the ranch. And we're totally at the cliffhanger moment. I'm like, okay, I gotta leave. And it killed me and I left. And so I was like, I know I'm gonna watch it again. So I go back and I watch it again, and I'm just as much enjoying it as the first time that I watched it. And it's sort of a groovy ride and interesting and stuff. And then finally we got to the climax of the film, and I won't tell it because I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But I had this reaction in this film, and I can't remember if we talked about this or not, but because I know we talked about Joker. But I watched the end of the climax of this film, which is very intense. So let's just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And it played with the mythology and the history of the Manson murders, which of course, just like we know, Jaws is going to go chomping on some, baby legs, some kids' legs. We know that there's going to be this horrific violence at the end of this film because that's due to the Manson murders. And Tarantino has such a unique take on that violence. It's such a weird mix of like ultra violence, violence against women that frankly just cross multiple lines for me, but there's a comedic element to it too. And I found myself simultaneously bawling and laughing hysterically, not like I was laughing so hard I was crying. I was like releasing something so deep, some like crying, like letting go of some kind of fear, while I was laughing at the humorous aspects, as like Brad Pitt's like doing his deal, right? Getting the dog to do the thing. And I swear to you, my theory, as kooky and silly as this sounds, but just on topic of changing your life, I'm convinced that my whole life, because I grew up with that scary media persona of crazy Charlie Manson.
Yeah.
It was almost like that media image of Charlie Manson like lived in the back recesses of my brain. It was like haunting some part of my psyche, and like there was all this pent up fear that, because I had seen that stuff as a kid and almost was traumatized by it. And then so when the way Tarantino sort of almost trivializes the Manson murders and makes them just ridiculous, it was almost like it was like what the Greeks talked about catharsis.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I don't know. I don't want to go too much up on that, but I just, wanted to share that.
Right. Well, it's like catharsis, or a big part of obviously what like a development person would say is like how much like all movies. I've had people tell me like all movies should be wish fulfillment, right? Well, that Once Upon a Time of Hollywood is the classic wish fulfillment of like where you, and even for why he wrote it that way,
Right.
for like as somebody who obviously saw what a tragedy all of the deaths were, but also to this upcoming actress who was like, and Polanski and all of it was like the wish fulfillment of like a different ending to that
Right.
story.
Well, and he haunted a nation too. It was both the tragedies to the individual people, but Redelia, what's a movie for you that was just like impacted so hard it changed your perspective?
Oh, I mean, there's just so many, but the one that I think about a lot and I haven't seen it again and I need to own it is Lumumba, which is by Raoul Peck. It was made in 2000, and I remember being at a film festival watching this film, and it's the story about Patrice Lumumba and how he was killed in the Congo, and all of the strife that was happening with those people. And I had to literally go back to the hotel and lay down after watching that film. I had to lay down the rest of the day. It was so moving and so powerful to me. And I tend to like biography or biographical films and documentaries. Those really move me, especially any documentary by Stanley Nelson. I don't know if you've seen Freedom Writers. And it's so regular in terms of just straight interviews with footage, like Kim Burns.
Yeah.
But when he talks about, you know, how beat down they were when they blew up the bus in Birmingham, and the students from Fisk were like, we're coming. They were like 18 years old. They had already written their last will and testament and was like, we're going to continue the freedom rides because we have to do this. And the way he cut those sequences together, it was just so powerful to think about these young kids, really babies, willing to give up you know, these are probably first generation college students at Fisk. You know, their families were like depending on them. And the way he cuts that sequence together, you are just like, you just can't help but be in tears, you know, just everyone, because you think about the magnitude of people fighting for the right to vote and fighting for the right to be integrated. And it's just, when you think back on our history and all the things that we've gone through, cinema is one of the places where a lot of things were introduced about how we feel about one another, right? How we view and see one another or don't see one another. Because I teach media, you know, the first nationally syndicated radio show was Amos and Andy. That was, you know, that's the first impression. If you lived, I don't know, in Idaho and you had radio, and I have my students do an assignment where they have to interview somebody in their 70s and 80s. These 70 and 80-year-olds remember Amos and Andy being a profound show that they listened to as children that they enjoyed. And then our first nationally broadcast or distributed feature film with sound intentionally was The Jazz Singer. And so these ideas of who we are, or my community specifically, like Gone with the Wind is a classic film, right? Except from a different perspective, it's horrific. I read, you know, I read this book with Alice Walker when she found out that Steven Spielberg was directing The Color Purple. She said she fainted for a week because all of his films, except for E.T., she felt were very violent. And she could not see how he could take that movie and make it something, you know, what she intended. But it worked out okay, because that's also one of my favorites too.
Yeah. No, but I mean, that's ultimately the beautiful thing about filmmaking and films as a you know, as an art form, is that they have such power. They have such power to it, to like influence our beliefs, influence like how we see people, how we, like you said, how we don't see people. I think that's a perfect way to say it. Intentionally and sometimes unintentionally, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's it's like that's how effective it is, right? It's an amazingly effective in that you can, you know, you can scare people, you can, you know, but you can also, you know, propagandize against people. You can do all kinds of amazing things, good and bad. And so that's why it's such a unique art form, right?
You know,
I mean,
what
obviously other art forms can do that too, but
you know, where that led my mind was, you know, Redelia's talking, and the students know this, and Redelia knows this, but I don't think I've ever told you this, Larry. And it makes me think about a criteria I want to lob at you and say, do you believe this is one of those criteria?
Sure.
So the movie, all my students know that the reason I became a filmmaker, I was pre-med. Some old hippie said, you need to see this movie called Do the Right Thing. I went and saw it. It was a life-changing experience for me. And you know, and that's what got me on that path. And Spike Lee came to campus and whatnot. And you know, one of the things though that I found particularly compelling about that film was its relentless, what I guess you'd call them like moral ambiguity or moral willingness.
It challenges you.
Willingness to embrace the complexities
Yes.
Of very complicated interracial relationships.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's what Scorsese's saying when he says that you have to have emotional risk. In other words, like, you watch Do the Right Thing, and maybe in some of the films that Redelia was talking about, right, and some of the films Redelia was talking about, and that there's all of a sudden there becomes something personal at stake for you, right? Not solely because of that we've fallen in love with the character and we care about the character, but that there's something at stake for you in terms of how things move forward, right? And as you build to the climax of the film, like, you're almost worried for yourself how things are going to shape out in the film.
Yeah, I mean, Do the Right Thing is such a complicated movie. I love it. It's one of my top movies. But I mean, I remember from the first time I saw it to revisiting it, the number of just sitting at a restaurant over beer and like arguing, like, why the fuck did Danny Aiello pay him? He just burned down his store. Why Danny Aiello gave him a job and was like, so, it was like basically supporting him against the brothers, his like Turturro and the other one, and it's like, and Jesus, and now it's like the way that movie turns and all of it, even from like the guy wearing the Air Jordans with the Larry Bird, what's his name, and getting in the fight with the guys on the step, and like you're constantly going, wait, whose side am I on here? They both have a point, It's like I think that movie challenges in a beautiful way. It's great.
Well, and so it makes you sort of think like, well, maybe that should be on the list. Is a willingness to embrace moral complexity again.
Well, it's that thing of like, right. It's a question of also what kind of movie you're making, right? Yeah, it's just a really fundamental question, right? I think you can make a movie that doesn't put you in that position, because I think Spike challenges you so often in that movie that it's uncomfortable because you're at odds with yourself and you're asking, and there are plenty of movies that do that. But I venture to say, not all movies, capital C movies, have to have that. That I would say is short of it. Not all of them do, because I think about the movies that I would put on a capital C list, and they don't necessarily do that. I mean, I think Parasite does that, right? You go, honestly, they're abusing this family, and that family's not that bad, right? Like, and you go, that movie puts you in that position, right? And I think that does a very effective thing in terms of like, you're kind of on both sides.
That I would just suggest to the students that, again, any of the criteria we've been talking about, right, are each one of them is a choice that you can make for yourself in terms of what your particular definition of cinema is. Remembering that, when at the end of the semester, you're gonna each make your own list of like, okay, what's my definition of cinema? Listen, Larry, you've helped me understand something about my particular definition of cinema in this conversation. Well, I totally get it, man. I'm like, I couldn't put necessarily, I don't know, what's a total easy feel-good film, like, E.T. If one of my criteria was an embrace of moral complexity, right? Not necessarily, for me, some people might say that it advocates an important moral issue or societal issue. Actually, for me, that could be on the list of possible criteria, but I wouldn't include that one on mine. That's not what for me resonates. But at the same time, I don't know that on my personal list, I could have a movie that I called cinema not embrace those moral complexities. Just in my thing. I'm not saying that's the way it should be for everybody, but you're right though. That would eliminate, I don't know, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I don't know what feel good movies like that we love. Wizard of Oz. I don't think I guess I couldn't put Wizard of Oz on my personal list.
Right.
Where so everybody kind of, I think why somebody might then ask, okay, why are we going through this exercise? I'll tell you why we're going through this exercise, because those of you that want to make movies need to define for yourself, what are your characteristics
For sure.
for cinema? And if for Larry, it's all the things he said, and something that makes you feel good, and it doesn't matter if it's not a requirement to have moral ambiguity or ambivalence, right? If that's you, then that's good. Then you should be pursuing that. But it's interesting because it just made me think, like, I think that's pretty high up there for me. I don't know that would be picking many movies that didn't on some level deal with that kind of moral ambiguity. Tell us, we're at 8:42. I want to spend some time talking with students. I don't even know what we got through. Did we get through the list?
Oh, I'll give you a couple more because it speaks maybe to your ET example, which for me is say something personal, right? Which is I want to feel the personal experience of that director in some way. And what I would say about ET, right, is Spielberg has forever been influenced by his parents' divorce, right? I think. And I find one of the things, and it's very early in that movie, that just gets me on board because it doesn't necessarily establish things that are essential to the movie, but they're so important to me getting like they're essential in the regards of what I think is essential, which is connecting with these characters, is the way they establish his home life with his single mom, who there's no father figure, and she's just trying to wrestle these three kids, and the way that he paints that picture of that family in ET early in that movie, it just I find to be essential to its success. It's not just, it's like the fact that these kids, I don't know, it's just the stakes feel very real, and it's very personal seemingly to Spielberg, for a guy that makes 4-quadrant wildly successful movies. Whenever I feel some of that personal aspect of Spielberg, I feel like it's a good Spielberg movie. And when they lose sight of it, then there's amazing craftsmen, but they're not making movies that I really respond to in that way. And I'd say the same thing about any filmmaker when they've made 20 movies. It's like, it's the ones that I feel like I'm feeling something personal. It's why Goodfellas is better than The Departed, as far as I'm concerned, because I feel like there's a lot of personal experience to Scorsese and his worldview in that movie more than there is in The Departed, right? He won an Oscar for The Departed, go figure. But nonetheless, so that's a big one for me. And be very, very specific. Is in the specific is the universal, right? Is the more specific you can be. I'll give you an example from Tarantino, right? And we don't have to play the clip, but like early in his career in that Reservoir Dogs is that tipping scene, right? It's one of the more memorable things you take away from that, is like the conversation about tipping, and the one guy doesn't tip, and it's not essential to the success of that movie in, like, on paper. You could see when you're running long on time going, we don't need this scene. It's not advancing the story, but it's establishing the sort of worldview of Tarantino, and he's created an entire career about being very specific about the details. It's about something that he finds interesting, and he believes, if I can paint this picture so beautifully, it's interesting and it has worth in this movie. So it may not have to advance the story, it may not have to, but it's about, it's giving me a little sense of the personality of that person behind the camera, and maybe it speaks more to that thing of, like, only Tarantino was going to include that tipping scene, because it's like, I don't know, it's the same way as a stand-up comedian. When they're talking personally, I feel like they're more successful than they're just like writing jokes, But and my last one is not necessarily, it's why it's last, is at some point it has to make me smile, and that doesn't mean it has to make me laugh. It just has to make me smile, and sometimes that comes in the form of me just admiring the technique, admiring the gusto or the chutzpah to try that. There are a couple movies that made me immediately, the minute the movie was over, I wanted to go back to the theater and watch it again. One was Pulp Fiction, and a friend of mine who I went with walked out. So you realize how different two movies made to two different people, right? The same movie to two different people. She walked out. I immediately wanted to watch it again. It felt like filmmaking that was just taking so many, it just was like taking so much, and Magnolia did the same thing for me. And both those movies are not beloved by all people, even though Pulp Fiction had made a huge amount of money. Magnolia probably less so, but he took so many chances in Magnolia, and so many moments were just about small human things that were just painting a tiny human picture. But if you think about Magnolia, Paul Thomas Anderson, from what I understand, was one of those like quiz kids. He was like a little bit like that kind of kid when he grew up. So that was the personal part to him. And so there's so many personal things in Paul Thomas Anderson movies, even when they're about an oil man or they're about Phantom, a guy, you always see there's something personal going on. And I think that's essential to the movie. I mean, the scene, let me just see if I can find one last scene, and then we can talk and take, let me just see.
I'm going to take some questions and maybe do some shot deck.
Yeah, for sure. I'll show you guys shot deck. We'll play this one. This one's just like, here, wait, I gotta, this is like an example of, hold on, I gotta share the screen, right? We'll play this one, and then I'll show you shot deck, and we'll talk about the other thing too. Only because, again, I talked about Magnolia, and it's one of those movies I've watched recently, and I love it. And I love Paul Thomas Anderson as a filmmaker.
When you first began it, you got what you want. You can hardly stand it though. By now you know it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop. It's not going to stop till you wise up. You're sure there's a cure. You have finally found it. You think one drink will shrink you to your underground and living down, but it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop. It's not going to stop till you rise up.
So that might, I mean, that's a good place to like at least not show any more clips, but that to me is like the one thing I didn't put on the list, but watching that clip is the ultimate thing, which is more about just generally speaking as something you almost have to remind yourself when you're making anything is risk falling flat on your face. Just risk, take risk. That is like the essence of that movie is in that scene, which is he is risking abject failure. That scene there, I'm sure there are as many people like me who love that movie and that scene as just laugh uncontrollably at the chance he took there. And I love it. I love it. I think he's as good a filmmaker as we've got. He's not universally loved, but for me, it's like here's a guy willing to take just a huge, big swing and risk looking terribly stupid, but it's like his filmmaking is that. And you know, when Todd and I went out to make Joker, the one thing we did say, because Todd obviously has had tons of success and we've tried to do this, but more so on Joker than any movie before, was why are we doing this if not to take a big swing? Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? Yes, it's a huge amount of people are going to be paying attention to this movie. We knew all eyes were going to be on it. It had a lot of attention. People were not necessarily believers that Todd could pull it off. Me as well, probably. And we're like, screw it, let's just take as big a swing as possible, because if we play down the middle, then we've sort of lost on both fronts. And so take risk would be the number one thing. And so, you know, maybe that's what Scorsese was also talking about, is sometimes those big movies, you know, because they are such commodity pieces, they don't feel as risky. But to go full circle, that's why I brought up that taking a ship into a small dock and the captains that have to steer it is, man, it's risky. And there's a lot more risk than it seems. And so I have mad respect for that. But that scene in Magnolia makes me smile. It has magic. It's very specific. It feels, and it's risky. And yeah, it sort of fires all those things for me. That's like, you know. Anyway,
Why don't we take some questions and then spend some time with Shot Deck?
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure.
Before we do that, because I just don't want to forget, because poor Nick Johnson was kind enough to be there at the start of class, and I was having technical difficulties. He wanted to make an announcement about the 15th annual AFA Film Festival, which for the first time ever is going to be entirely online. And he wanted me to share some information, which I'm going to do now. It's almost like a commercial break. The event goes live at 6 p.m.
This is when? Oh, you're going to tell us, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to give you the whole, this is for the students and for SMC too. And I will be emailing this to everybody, but they're going to go live 6 p.m. on May 1st on Twitch, and we'll send you that information. The event is entirely free to watch. It includes a live chat with other audience members. We'll be giving away exclusive merchandise to the students, to the audience throughout the show. And Larry, this is different from the thing that you and I were
Understood. Cool.
So then, I will email everybody. If you want to submit films, ASU students, the selection committee signups and submissions close tomorrow at midnight. So you'll need to make your submissions ASAP. And I'm going to just send this whole thing as a big text that I will send through the chat. Okay, so let's take a few questions. And is Redelia?
Yeah, we have several questions. Let's start with David Holtz. David, you still here?
I am here.
Awesome. You can ask your questions.
Okay, well, why don't you pop on your camera too, and so Larry can see you.
Oh, there you are. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Great.
All right. Well, I kind of have two questions for you, but I'll ask the first one. It's kind of a tougher question, I guess. Um, After Joker came out and everybody saw it, I got into this heated argument with another guy because he was basically accusing you and the director of basically ripping off Martin Scorsese in films like Taxi Driver
Yeah.
and The King of Comedy. And I was trying to defend the film, basically saying, no, this is like an homage to Scorsese and like a love letter to the films that he's done before.
Yeah.
And so I was just curious, how much of like his influence did you take into the film for the visuals of it and things like that?
Not as much as you would think. I think there's a weird thing. Like, for instance, Adam screened Taxi Driver with Michael Chapman, the DP, and I don't know, was it about a month before the movie came out? 2 or 3 weeks before the movie came out? Is that right? I think I can't hear you, Adam. But anyway.
Yeah, it was like
yeah,
2 weeks before the release of the movie.
That was
Yeah,
the first time I had seen the movie in over 10 years. So I think there's a lot of misconception that people think we studied that movie and did that. Now, the influence of Taxi Driver and King of Comedy on Joker is essentially when Todd wrote the script and also when we conceived the sort of idea of, it's like we're telling an old 70s character study in a time in which most of those movies would be either based on set pieces, action scenes, those kind of things. We were doing a sort of a deep dive character study. So there's no question, like, of course, we're fans of Taxi Driver, but we're also fans of Dog Day Afternoon and, and Midnight Cowboy and, any sort of the movies back then that were like, Straight Time, whatever, that were effectively character studies. And that's really what Joker is. So that it's as influenced by those other movies or 10 others in a multitude of ways as specifically Taxi Driver. And if you actually, and from a look standpoint, not that much. I did look at a couple images from Taxi Driver, but I also looked at 20, and we can look at it when I show you Shot Deck. You'll see some of the influences. But it's probably more influenced by a movie like Killing of the Sacred Deer than it is by Taxi Driver. And that's, I think, a misconception. And visually not at all referenced to King of Comedy. King of Comedy, I think people, it's simply because it's about a failed comedian that's a bit delusional. So there's some structural story stuff that make people think of King of Comedy. And like this sort of just like the way it devolves into like him going and kidnapping a guy, and and the fact that De Niro's in it and blah blah blah. But visually, I don't think we reference one thing from King of Comedy, not one. So but I think as all filmmakers, we're influenced by all the movies we've seen, right? And so you're constantly taking that information in. But surprisingly not as visually referencing Taxi Driver as one would think.
Okay.
Yeah, that was an interesting conversation that we had, and maybe we can start queuing up a next question, Redelia. Thanks, David.
Yep.
You and I had talked about that, where when I had seen the trailer, even my mind went to those two movies, Taxi Driver and King Comedy, and then it was only until you kind of pointed out and I looked at even just the trailer, and there weren't a lot of visual reference points to those films, and it was much more about the tone, the character, the loner,
that's right,
and the feeling of it. And maybe there were other movies like the one you mentioned, that Killing of a Sacred Deer, that were reference points. Redelia, who else is up for us on the Q&A?
Trevor Cromwell has a really interesting, good technical question.
Great.
Yeah, Trevor, pop on your camera, buddy, and hop on the question.
I don't have a camera, unfortunately, but I can pass
That's all right.
mic.
That's okay.
Just have to describe yourself. I'm just kidding. Carry on.
Actually, did your internship for Shot Decks. If you
there you go.
want me to speak out on it or something later, then I can do that.
All right, cool.
But my question was centered around lookup tables, and I feel like a lot of DPs and like Hollywood and stuff, if you look up interviews and stuff, you don't really hear them talk about it all that much.
Sure.
I've heard in passing that like Roger Deakins has used the same one for like 20 years or something like that. And I was just kind of wondering what your process was with developing them, and if you create new ones for each movies or you consistently go back to the same ones.
Yeah, I never used them that much. I did use a very specific one for Joker, but that's also because you know, I actually didn't even really understand them that much outside of like, I understood that like you took a raw file and you added a lookup table. Like it could be just a 709 lookup table or something. And it would suddenly like bake into that raw file some S-curve shape that would sort of make it something, right? So I knew there were tons of DPs that would shoot digitally and talk about, you know, I'd have a day lookup table, a night lookup table. I sometimes would have those available, but I would almost never use them. And I would shoot with like almost the most simple thing ever. It was, if it was a lookup table, it was like it had almost no specificity to it because I was like, I came from such a film background and I would just like to that. Because we were going to shoot Joker on film until the absolute last minute, and when we decided to shoot digitally, I then asked my colorist, who has been with me for a long time, to help develop one lookup table for the whole movie that would really mimic the film stock that we were shooting, but more if we were going to try to build something, the film stock from like 1980, 5293, which I think actually came out in 84, but it was around the same time. But it was an amazing film stock. So Joker, I did use that LUT, and that LUT was very important because it was just one LUT. But what it allowed me to do was just I could light to that LUT, put that LUT into the raw file, and just day, night, interior, exterior, didn't matter. It was just that one LUT. But it definitely was a very interesting LUT. In the same way as if you go on Instagram and or Hiptomat or you know any of those sort of things. I don't use them all, but anything. Photoshop has them too. You could just cycle through a bunch of like looks. That's effectively what a LUT is, right? It's like a baked in overlay onto the raw file that'll sort of create certain visual sort of things. It might have, in our case for Joker, because we were trying to replicate somewhat of the movies and the way photography looked in the late 70s, early 80s, it was like replicating both the film S-curve, but also some of the tendencies that I attribute to film, which is like cyan in the highlights and green yellow in the low end. And so it replicated some of that. That's why you'll actually see a lot of cyan and yellow in Joker. So
All right, thank you. Yeah.
yeah, some use it more than others. I'm so like simple in that regard that I've gone and used that Joker LUT again on a couple things, but I should probably create new ones. I just am probably too lazy to do it. So.
All right, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you got it.
Anthony has a question.
Hello. My
How are ya?
laptop camera is not working right now. I apologize.
No worries.
But the scene from that PTA movie Magnolia that you showed us reminded me of the first Reform scene. It was of like the magic carpet ride. I don't know if you've seen the first Reform.
Is that the one that what's his name? That Ethan Hawke's in?
Yeah.
I still haven't seen that movie. The movie's supposed to be amazing. I need
Yeah,
to see
really
it. I know
good,
I keep
really
hearing
good.
such good things.
Yeah, they just have this really like kitschy, corny part like in it, but it reminded me of the PTA Magnolia scene that you put, and it did remind me a lot about
That makes
this.
me want to see it now. That's cool.
But my question was because you had that little anecdote about how you said Ryan Coolidge, you know, you seen that how he put like his personal touch in Black Panther, and how you seen like it was just personal to him. So I just wanted to know like what was your personal touch that you added into Joker?
That's a really good question.
That is really interesting because there's no question that the film like has risk and it has singularity, right? I mean, I don't think anybody could dispute that, but it's interesting about
well, particularly as the DP versus the director, but I mean, I know there's plenty in there. Yeah, I'm just trying to think specifically.
It's really, especially
vis-a-vis
what you said about Spielberg, right? Where it's like there's a touch of his personal life that made its way into the movie, right? I think
I mean, I think the short of it is listen, and I don't even describe all those things to the movie I directed, but in the movie I directed, I tried to put so many personal things, even in that were way off. Like every day I tried to put personal things in communicating to actors. I would try to talk about a personal thing. It could just be some little thing that I would try to work away in. It didn't necessarily make the cut, as a director, I think you have a lot more opportunity. As a DP, my personal stuff is going to be a lot of like a feeling and emotional connection to the lighting and the compositions. So I'm constantly creating little personal things. So a lot of it is probably more in the lighting, in the way that I perceive night or I perceive interior, and it's like subconscious things that I'm doing when I'm lighting that are all about just personal, right? So I spend a lot of time wherever I am just studying the world around me for light. And so that personal thing, in the same way as, it's like I have a thing about people that have like that work at, and it's unfortunate because it's a lot of people, and I don't dislike the people. I just feel sad that they're in a position in which like they're like, there's nothing I can do. It's the rules, and I'm like, oh, so a robot could take your job. You should be careful because a robot is going to take your job. If you have no say, then you're effectively telling the robots to come take my job. That's like a personal pet peeve I have, right? So it's like I would try to work that into something. I can't do that as a DP, but I could write a script in which I try to work in that philosophy, and that would be the personal thing. But like,
But was there anything that that Todd had, like, did he feel like a loner growing up, or or anything that that in the way Spielberg again put in those little personal touches?
yeah, it's a really great question. I think I just have to think about it a little and go through it like shot by shot or script and like talk about it. I don't know. It's a really good question. I mean, it would be a question more for Todd because he lived with that script, writing it and making it, for much longer. He wrote it for a year before he even sent it to me.
Redelia, let's take another
Yeah.
question.
Devin,
Thank you.
yeah, Devin Gomez.
Devin, pop on your camera if you got it going on.
Oh, hey.
Hey.
Here, I forgot what I wrote. Hang on.
It was-
Oh yeah. My question was, I know you talked earlier about like working with green screens and
Yeah.
CGI and stuff like that. So I was wondering what your sort of general visual approach was to shooting Godzilla and sort of working with that whole deal.
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging, and it's like I'm prepping, well, before the whole Corona thing, I'm prepping Black Adam, which also has a lot of that same kind of stuff. It's tricky. I think as much as you can, still reduce it back to just like an indie film, which is to make it as connected to like the moment and the scene as you possibly can, in spite of the fact that the characters are taking place in a green screen world, right? So the benefit of Godzilla to some extent was we often had these sort of bioluminescent characters. The monsters had a bioluminescence, so Rodan had a color and Godzilla had a color, and they emitted these kind of so that allowed for a certain lighting thing that I could impose on each scene based on the characters, the monsters that were in them. But in terms of just like a scene in which you're like existing in a green screen space, just try to mess it up where you can so it doesn't feel as controlled, and try to just constantly imagine the world, which is really hard to do. Imagine the world that's beyond, the characters in the foreground, so that you can imagine how like the real world environment would have its effect on that specific scene, right? So it's a lot of imagination and pre-visualization, so it's tricky. It's really actually quite tricky because you can't. I'm a very reactionary filmmaker. If I had my druthers, everything would be on location and everything would be under like as much natural and available light as possible, with less imposition by myself into it, as opposed to a blank canvas in which you're bringing in all this stuff. And so the blue screen world is that blank canvas, so it's a bit challenging. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Al Sanchez has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Devin. Al, is your camera operational?
No, it is not. But
That's okay, my friend.
all right. So hello. I actually went to the Taxi Driver screening.
Oh, cool.
And saw it. So that was a really fun experience and definitely hyped me up more for Joker. And the film did not disappoint. It's one of my favorites.
Awesome.
Of all time. And I actually wanted to like ask a question about certain scenes that I feel like really stand out from that film, and just like the ways maybe like your thought process or like how you worked with the director. One of them being like the bathroom scene. It's considered like super iconic. There's no dialogue at all. It's just
Oh, the one where
us
he's
looking.
dancing in the back.
Yeah, where he's dancing just alone. Even the intro sequence, there's not really dialogue, and yet just you see how dirty the streets are, and
Yeah.
you just immediately hooked me in on feeling sorry for this poor man with a sign. And then like the third scene being like when he's dancing down the stairs. Those are like the three like kind of segments that to me are like stand out from that film, and I just wanted to know like maybe what your specific processes were like through like those specific scenes where it's really just the camera looking at this character kind of driving our attention the most.
Yeah, really good questions. So it sort of goes a bit to the philosophy of the psychological place that you want to place the characters in, and then how can the camera placement, lensing take you and help enhance that experience, besides obviously Joaquin's performance and anything the script's doing. But obviously in all three of the scenes you pointed out, there's not a lot of dialogue. So early in the movie, and this is just you can make a similar argument towards wide lensing, but for me, the longer the lens and the further away you are, right? And I can use this as a leaping off point to shot deck, because then I can use these stills as an example if you think that's a good idea, Adam.
I do.
Okay, so I'll answer your question, but first I'll just explain this website that I created. So this website I created was simply because I needed it to exist, which is over years and years of like prepping for movies, I would be in constant sort of need of visual examples to use either as an expression of what my vision of the project I was trying to get in an interview, or once I got the project, trying to communicate an idea to a director. And so I built this visual database with 3 other people called Shot Deck, right? And if you want, you just go on shotdeck.com, request to be a beta tester, say you're a student, you met me on this thing, and we'll push you guys through. But effectively, it's just this, it's in a database of imagery that you can use to help for all those things we just described, right? For inspiration, research, education, reference, maybe just because you just are looking for something to sort of like guide your expression of ideas for your projects. Or sometimes in the same way as we pulled up those clips to express maybe an idea for a scene, this would be about lighting, composition, and other things like that. So if, let's say, you were looking at this scene, there's all these tags here on the right. Do you guys still have my screen, right?
No, you have to share it.
Yeah. Oh, I thought I shared it already. I'm sorry. I didn't realize I took it off share, or did somebody else take it back on share?
That may have been me.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. Sabotaged. Anyway,
I'm kind of live switching here. It's sort of fun.
Oh, that's why. Okay. Do you see it now?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Got it. So anyway, so here it is in its full glory, not seeing Adam. So it's a database of imagery, and in each image you have all these criteria that you can search from, right? So you can search by location, or you can search by the cinematographer, see Roger Deakins and see some of his other work. Now you can see all these things. You can see all these 21 movies of Roger Deakins broken down. So you can now study, oh, what was it like Hail Caesar? He was trying to recreate the movies of the 50s. So you can look at Hail Caesar and see the photography there and what he was doing, versus Sicario or Prisoners or something like that, right? You could look at the imagery from Sicario. Let's say you're making a movie that's about the drug trade, or you just want that look and feel. You're trying to express your vision to a director or a production designer, all that. And then within that, you can see here, and you can see other images of Emily Blunt, or you can look at even the tags here, like, hand on head or something like that, right? And then you can just see a bunch of images of people with their hands on their head, because maybe you want to see that. So to answer it's obviously it's meant to be this like encyclopedia of imagery for all kinds of purposes, creative purposes, for filmmakers, creative executives, directors, students, of course, all that stuff. And what's also nice from an educational standpoint, let's say we want to discuss Joker, we can now do a bit of a deeper dive into the specifics of Joker. So within the site, there's, a half of, 500 images from Joker in which we can talk about that opening scene, right? So the philosophy for that opening scene was to see Arthur Fleck, right, dressed like a clown, in an environment in which we felt like he was both insignificant and it was very real. So one of my philosophies, not just the insignificance comes in a couple ways. One, he's barely even a speck in this frame. You're seeing a vast world, one which obviously we're establishing a time period. So this has some set extension. We shot this in Newark, New Jersey. And basically about this height where my cursor is all the way across is like real Newark. And then all of this stuff is set extension that the visual effects department did to kind of like, this lower level was all production design. But Arthur is this tiny little person right here, small, insignificant in a very vast world, almost unseen by the world around him. So partly for me, the philosophy is then longer lenses, further away, lots of foreground, right? So what we're trying to do is see Arthur, all these people are just walking past, not even paying attention. He's just doing this thing he does every day. And literally he's just as if he was invisible, which is a big theme in the movie. Show him in that way. So instead of giving him power and position in the frame, we're making him small and insignificant and much more longer lens, right?
And yet also, and for those that are in my directing class or have taken it, the other key visual design principle in the shot that's at the very top, and probably also in the wide shot too, is that everything in that frame is incredibly desaturated except for one thing, and that's that bright yellow sign.
Yeah, so we pick him out in this world. So it's able at least to be able to key on where he is, and his outfit. He also has the yellow vest, the green hair, of course, all these things that are partly future toned versions of who he becomes in Joker. And so we're staying in this long lens world, when he's running down the alleyway, all of these things are trying to be as long lens as possible. And the first time we go to a wider lens is the moment in which he's now on the ground alone by himself, having been beaten down. And we did make that camera move away from him as he's, so we can watch that for a second.
Team up! Take a stop! Let's go! Let's go! Come on, come on, come on! Let's go! Let's go! Let's go!
So that's sort of philosophically what I was going for, is that juxtaposition. So the wider lens is a way for us to connect with Joker or Arthur at this point in the movie, because we're now physically in proximity to him 2-3 feet away, as opposed to, let's say, 20 feet, 30 feet, that would be the longer lens.
Let me ask a couple questions really quick that are a little on the technical front. And listen, no visual design is ever like perfect by its own rules, but just for my own curiosity, that opening shot, the big wide one, that's a pretty wide lens.
Well, yeah,
too.
but right, of course, but it's a wide lens of a very wide, extreme wide shot. So
I get it.
Right.
I just wanted to make sure.
As opposed to, like, if you tried to replicate that, let's say you were trying to be a purist to this idea, right, of like 75 mil or higher as far as that. So you go, okay, well, we won't shoot this. Then so we go like even further away on a longer lens to even do this establishing shot. You could maybe go by that rule. That was less, because it was more about his significance in the frame and the amount of, and it's also a higher shot. Most of the other shot is ground level. The only
Totally. And one other technical question really quick, and I'm going to unshare just for a sec. On that really wide angle shot where you really get in with him, I noticed that it's daytime, it's a wide angle lens, and there's really shallow depth of field. And
in the end.
In the end, and I thought that was really unique. You guys would have had to go to a lot of trouble to knock down the depth of field shooting outside with a wide angle lens. Can you point out that shot again? And then
Yeah, I mean, in part, we shot this film on a large format camera called the Arri Alexa 65. So a lot like a 70 millimeter film camera, it's like medium to large portrait photography. So effectively, even a wide lens like this shot here was probably shot on a 58 millimeter lens.
So you didn't have to knock down you didn't have to put ND filters on there.
You're still putting ND filters, but we're also in the canyon of a alleyway. So there's not as much. The only light is the skylight above. So yes, of course, we're constantly putting ND in to sort of put the f-stop of the lens at a nice place where we want it. So in this case, probably a 2.8, as opposed to like if you did nothing and you put it at 11 or 16, you have a lot more depth of field.
And for those students that just aren't as technically inclined, what we're specifically talking about is how the Joker is in focus and the background is out of focus. That's what's referred to as depth of field. Most of you'll know that, but just making sure. But keep going, Larry.
Right, but so the benefit, let's say, or the net effect of a large format camera like the Alexa 65 is if you were shooting a spherical 35 millimeter chip, let's say of an Alexa Mini or something like that, you might be now on a 25 mil. So the 25 mil has got the field of view that this is providing, meaning it's a fairly wide lens, but your depth of field is going to be much greater because it's a wider lens, like a 25. This being on now at 58 mil or something like that, it has the net field of view of the 25 or 27 mil, but it's got the depth of field of a longer lens because it's actually a 58 millimeter lens. So you're getting a shallower depth of field. So much like anamorphic, which all the lenses are kind of like longer lens and hence a much shallower depth of field, shooting large format or shooting anamorphic is going to inherently give you a shallower depth of field, but you can shoot on much wider lenses. So the beauty of that is you can be physically closer to the actor, but you don't necessarily have some of the same distortion that you have with a wide lens. And you also don't have sometimes the sort of like distracting elements of too much depth of field. You actually have this kind of separating quality where you can put Arthur in his environment like he is here, where you can see actually the edges and the sort of walls of the alleyway, whereas if you want a really compressed lens, you wouldn't see that. You can feel the sort of earth moving underneath him because it's a wide enough lens that camera move skating along the ground allows you to feel the motion, which is much more effective on wider lenses. But the shallower depth of field really makes you draw your attention into Arthur and his headspace, which is the number one thing early in the movie.
Quick question, Larry,
To like
from Al.
connect with us emotionally. Oh, we should share it.
Really quick, and we are, believe we're sharing it right now.
Oh, good.
Quickly,
Yeah,
so
because you can control it, right? Is that what it is?
Yeah, sometimes I can flip it over to put
Got it.
you on the screen as opposed
Yeah,
to.
no worries.
But Al wanted to know for the Shot Deck beta sign up.
Yeah.
If we don't have a website, what is something we can include?
Oh, I
as a
mean, you could do
replacement?
like, yeah, because you probably are trying to do it. Now you could include like, I mean, you could do Instagram, or you could do, I mean, do something that, yeah, I mean, it could be something. Yeah. If you have an Instagram or something creative,
Like a social media platform or something that displays our work in some way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all. It's just meant to be like an industry site of sorts, a bit of a professional tool. It's not, and just trying to limit its beta testers to some extent. Yeah.
Cool.
But nonetheless, so that this is like the long answer to that question from before is, so then, there was and so even here, there's a bit of longer lens thing going on in the social worker office, because again, it's early in the movie. much same philosophy is existing on the bus, which is longer lenses. See him with foreground people. He's again slightly more insignificant. So we could have put the camera much closer. And even if, here is a good example, seeing him slightly slightly less significant in the frame and part of a bigger world in which he's effectively invisible. So ways to show that are just to sort of get the camera, put a bunch of foreground people, and do it on a slightly longer lens. Whereas when we finally get through this scene, again, even here, shooting across the street, shooting further away from him, even if we're following him physically. I'll play this just as a little sequence. Right across the street. Right. So this philosophy early on the movie was to basically see him from further away. Again, the sort of question of his place in society. And we even do a little bit of it with the mom. But then when he's finally shooting a little further away, again, we're in a smaller environment. We're not shooting super long lens, but it's also about the sizing and choosing very specifically when to move closer and connect to Arthur's headspace, which is when we're now changing to wider lenses. And even through here, we're in his fantasy, and it's not until the next time we're in his apartment where we're with his mom that we're now working into wider lenses on him, connecting now to him emotionally. When he's playing with the gun, we're now in wider lenses. So we're like, when we're alone with Arthur, we're now in a bit of a wider lens space. So later, we're still a bit longer lens here with Sophie, but as he progresses to Joker, we're now getting, we're actually, in a way, as he goes more mad and as he goes more towards Joker's side, we're now getting closer to him physically with the camera. So the real transitional moment in that, obviously, right, is there's a bit of some mixture of lensing in the subway scene. But when he runs into the bathroom, and maybe you were, they're describing this little transitional scene when he's running away down the alleyway. Anyway, even the following shot where he's looking behind him is on a longer lens. That wide shot when he first enters and the shadow comes in, that's on a wide lens, but it's higher. So again, it's all making a transition towards when he finally sort of crosses the line and starts to make his transition towards Joker. That's when we're into that scene you were describing inside the bathroom, which is all quite wide lenses. This is a pretty wide lens, and that's a very, very minimal coverage. There's just two positions here, mostly a oneer.
And so,
but it's
Larry,
like we're really connecting with him, hopefully, at this point, emotionally, to what's going on in his head. So physically, our proximity to him is much closer.
And Larry, just to confirm, so all the ASU students and SMC students can essentially beta test this sort of test drive shotdeck.com.
That's right, and just use it. That's right, exactly, and just use it as a tool to help you find visual references for your projects and to study the artistry of film and try to replicate, just to be able to have in a portable fashion a way to sort of like just look at different movies and study the photography, study the composition, the lighting, you name it.
Show us, can you go back to the sort of the splash page just to give everybody just a quick glance one more time, like
Oh,
just
yeah.
the browse
Right. So
movie.
this is the home page, right? And you can list, there's also like a little list on the homepage of like top films, top directors, you could search by keyword searches of what people are searching for or recent searches, right? So you can see like frame within a frame, right? A very common technique for photography, but you might want to show examples or try to find inspirational examples, right? Of just
Amazing.
it's
How
just
many images do you have on there now?
140,000 or so.
Extraordinary.
And
That's
like
just that's just awesome.
1,500 movies. I mean, I usually will start on browse shots because browse shots is kind of it's listed. Sorry, I'm just going right. It's listed in order of popularity, so it's just or you can sort by other things, but it defaults to popular. So sometimes it's just a way to just look for something engaging to your eye. It's a really interesting thing also because you can just build a deck of images that engage you, and you might start to discover what's interesting to you. Why do you keep picking those images? What is it about that? And you might discover something about your own aesthetic, and but you might be able to find a shot that you don't know, and you go, what is this from? Oh, it's from this movie, The Americans. Oh shoot, I don't know that movie. And then you can sort of use the site to discover more. Oh, who shot it? Oh, is Martin Rue. Well, I don't know other Martin Rue. We may not have much from Martin Rue, but you could look at Martin and go, oh, what else has Martin shot? He shot Run All Night, and he shot American Pastoral.
Yeah,
By the way,
it's just
yeah.
amazing.
So anyway, so use it in the ways that it can be helpful for you as filmmakers.
Well, thank you so much for extending the generosity to let the students use this incredible creation that you have created. And we're just so psyched that ASU gets to be a part of that. And we'll connect with SMC and Salvador in the film area, as well as Redelia's media program, and figure out ways to do more stuff with Shot Deck. And I thought it would be nice to, you've been so generous with your time. We're under 2 hours. Maybe just a couple more questions from the
Sure,
students.
why not? Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, Pierce Lochner.
Hello.
How are you?
Pierce, you got a camera?
Yes. I do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I do. So
There
I was
he is.
also at the taxi driver shindig.
Oh, cool.
I was the one who was very enthusiastic in the front row during the raffle.
Yes, I remember you well. I do remember you.
Perfect. I'm glad, because this is going to be a follow up with that. So I came up to you after, and I didn't ask you a question. All I did was give you a handshake. And now,
did you give me coronavirus?
No, this was months ago, man. Come on.
Are you patient X? Yeah.
No. But I was being very patient with my question. So I gave you a handshake, and I didn't ask you a question. I was gonna say, how was the handshake? You remember it?
It was a good handshake. It was solid. Very, very good.
That's perfect. Now I don't have to. I'm messing.
There will be, by the way, there will be no more handshakes. You may have been the last to get a handshake. Handshakes are done, Fauci said. So we're done with handshakes.
Excellent. I mean, not excellent, but also I got the last handshake, so I'm living with that. That's my question. That's it.
There you go.
Wait, I just want to weigh in really quick here. Pierce, it looks like you actually lit to your virtual background.
Oh yeah, I did light to my virtual background.
That's
on.
Awesome.
Well, because I'm doing a play right now via Zoom. It's called Don't Eat the Lava Lamp. And I'm currently in the space where I've been doing my lines. So I have my purple light there, and it fits really well with this. But I also have a cyan light in the back, but it didn't really vibe with this one.
Got it.
The purple is better at night.
Yeah, it's a good color combination with the red and the green. I like it.
Yeah, I know Janaki Sadan is watching the live stream. I know he's impressed. I'm impressed. All right, Pierce, thanks for the question, bud.
Yeah, no problem.
Who else has got a question for Larry?
So David Holtz had a part 2 to his question, which I think is really good.
Okay.
David, can you ring back on?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay.
Okay, so I noticed that you also did Godzilla King of the Monsters in the same year that Joker was released. And I'm just wondering, like, what's the biggest difference between doing a movie with like giant monsters fighting versus doing a smaller character study like Joker?
I mean, it's still filmmaking. It's not that different. It's just Joker provides more opportunity for just quiet moments, right? Like there's not as many quiet moments in a movie like Godzilla. So there's just more, there's just different driving principles behind the movie at large, right? There's like set pieces, lots of like big other elements, right? Whether it's like crazy ships that they're flying around in or ground level stuff with lots of explosions versus at its heart, Joker could have been a $5 million movie. You know what I mean? It's like there's nothing inherent to Joker that makes it, more than just an indie film, like very handmade, but my philosophy as a cinematographer towards both is not that dissimilar. It's still filmmaking. You're still dissecting each scene by scene and figuring out the best way to tell the story for that scene, trying to do it efficiently. Even with $180 million budget, you're still, you still have limitations. You're not like just like burning money each morning over the craft service table. There's still like things you can't do. And, and Joker, which was relatively limited, but not for like, most people, it's still $50 million. You're just trying to fight through the day and make the best scene each day that you can. Yeah. Every movie I've done, and I've done tiny movies in the middle of all of movies that's maybe 30, $40 million or not, but like they always are the same. A movie's a movie. It really is. It's like it's never that different at the heart of it, which is also, it's demystifying and helps when you actually are in a position to go make it because you're like, oh, I know how to make this because I've made anything, right? So you just keep plowing ahead that way.
Any more
Okay.
questions for Delia? Thanks, David.
No, that's it. It's funny.
Awesome.
Last night we were watching, I can't even remember what we were watching, but one of my friends said that the camera department calls that the bokeh shot.
Which one?
When it's
The out of focus thing? Yeah,
in
exactly.
the background and it's a portrait shot. Have you ever heard that term before, bokeh? I think it'd be Okeh.
Yeah, man. Why don't you just search for it on Shot Deck? I can show you.
Okay. Great plug.
No, but I mean that's like you think about a film term like bokeh, right? And it's like there should be more than that, but that's an example, right? So bokeh is usually referred to this out of focus stuff happening here. It's really just like people haven't tagged bokeh enough. This is a good example of bokeh. This sort of it's more than a hexagon, but whatever, octagonal.
Oh,
This
share your screen.
Oh, sorry.
Took you off.
I
That's
thought
all
you
right.
could do it. I thought you could do
I
it.
don't think I can share your screen. I can just turn it off.
You can't turn it back on. So this would be an example of bokeh.
Ah,
It's the out of focus lights here,
got it.
the out of focus like pattern that happens when lights are out of focus in the background, or something like this. That's
Yeah.
an example of bokeh.
All right, I will
Yeah.
go back to that last shot real quick. And the first, don't say what movie it's from.
Oh, that shot there?
Yeah,
The
go
bokeh
back to
shot?
the very last bokeh shot. And I will give a pat on the back to the first student, a virtual pat on the back to the first student. No, not this one, the next one.
Well, you can see it, man.
Oh,
It's
there
like
it is.
It
There it
tells
is.
you what it is.
Wait, but they have, well, now they can. They wouldn't have looked over there. First student who can send me through the chat what this movie is gets a virtual pat on the back. Now just like cover up that area.
Yeah, how do I do that, man?
From Devin Gomez.
Put
It
my
very
hand.
prominently says Barry Lyndon. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Well, Barry Lyndon famously had an f 1.0 or a 0.7 lens, a 50 mil. They call it the Barry Lyndon lens, right? We had the 1.0 version for Joker, which it's always like, is that really the Barry Lyndon lens? But we had a 1.0 f-stop lens for Joker. But famously, this scene here, or many scenes in Barry Lyndon, they actually shot on film, by the way, a lot different than digital, under actual candlelight only. And so that's why these lenses were developed just to photograph these scenes under just candlelight. So that was one of the
Amazing.
more memorable things about Barry Lyndon. Was just that aspect of it, was shooting under such absolute low level of light. So there you go.
All right, so let's unshare your screen, Larry. I would like all the students to turn on your camera. Let's do one big final Brady Bunch gathering before we say goodbye. We also have the ASU Entertainment Business Association watching together on our live stream, and including also visiting on live stream, my esteemed colleague, Janaki Sedana. We want to just give one more round of thanks to you, Larry. Everybody turn on your microphone. Let's give Larry some love. Give him some hoots and hollers. Woo, woo.
Hoot and holler.
Thank you guys.
Hoots and
Thank you.
hollers. Larry, that was super special for everybody. You gave so much of your time. We got to see Shot Deck. We got your insights into cinema. Redalia, any final remarks?
It was really good. I now know what a bokeh shot is.
There you go.
You hear it on the set all the time with certain things, and you're like, oh, what is that?
Yeah. It's talked a lot about with lenses, about what the bokeh is on that lens and all that stuff. So yeah, very popular term. They did an Apple commercial about bokeh.
Oh, I have the
Right, because if you have an iPhone in portrait mode, you can adjust the depth of field.
Yes.
So you can make it a 1:4 and everything goes really out of focus.
Yeah.
So you can control that bokeh with an iPhone. Yeah.
Nice.
Well, Larry, it was just great.
My
Redalia,
pleasure, guys. My pleasure. Thank you all.
how are we going to top that next week, Redalia? How are we going to top Larry Sher?
We're
I
not.
don't know.
You'll find the way.
Well, let me tell
It
you
won't
a
be that
little
hard.
bit. Let me tell you, folks watching in the class, of course, and our friends on the live stream on YouTube, what we got shaping up for next week. Let me just show you something really cool and give you a little preview of what you're going to be able to experience next week. The guest is the company, the CEO of the company, The Third Floor. And The Third Floor was named after the group of individuals, programmers, computer coders who worked on the third floor of Skywalker Ranch. And this company has evolved into what I refer to as the biggest open secret in Hollywood. They do this incredible pre-visualization work for some of the biggest movies that you'll ever find. And let me just share one little quick preview of what we're going to be able to experience next week here on Welcome to Hollywood with Adam and Redalia. Check this out, everybody. This is super cool.
Oh yeah.
You get an audio?
Yeah.
So what you got here is you got previs on the left and you got the final version on the right. And we're going to meet the CEO of the company that put all this together. Now, I tell you, Larry, have you ever worked with a group?
Yeah.
This group here?
Yeah, many times. Lots on going back to War Dogs. We did a sequence using Third Floor as previs. We did tons of it on Godzilla. We're doing some of it on Black Adam, of course. It's an amazing place, and they're essential to modern big budget action filmmaking. They're like as essential a part. They usually are hired long before a DP or they're like some of the first people that start work on a movie often.
Well, it's going to be a great class, and this was a great class. Everybody turn on your microphones one more time. Give them another hoot and a holler. Come on, people.
Thank you, guys.
Yay.
Thank you.
Larry, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
For sure, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Cool.
guys. Good luck out there. Stay safe.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you so much.